Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Tits Up. I'm sure you all know by now, I am Megan, and I am joined by my fabulous co-host, Sam.
Hello, listeners. It's great to be here. We're in for a real treat today. I don't think I've ever been this excited for an episode, yet, anyway. Grab your blanket, just like mine, and maybe a nice snack, healthy one or not. That's your choice. We have a very special guest this week.
Listeners, our guest is Lisa Wingrove, a registered dietitian. She specializes in debunking food myths and giving quality food advice, specifically to us onco patients. She is here to help us uncover the truth behind some persistent food myths, especially those related to cancer. And we would also like her to talk a little bit about her piece of the pie called Fearless Foods. So, Lisa, welcome to the show.
Hey, Megan and Sam, it's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're so excited. So, Lisa, could you just give us a little bit of your background, how you got into this area, and then do a shameless plug for Fearless Foods?
Brilliant. So I got into this area through a love of food that was encouraged really by my grandmother. She was an amazing cook and she would always prepare food to take care of others. And so when I did my degree, that was really, I think, the basis for it. The other thing is I just love food and I love cooking it, but I love eating it. And it's such an important part of my life. And so, when I finished my degree in dietetics, I started working in oncology, and I worked in oncology for over 10 years. I've been a certified specialist in oncology nutrition. But I think my personal experience with cancer with my husband and my mother have both really shaped how I approach the care of patients, because I have a practical and personal perspective to bring to that rather than just from textbooks. So, and where am I now? I'm Fearless Food, a shameless plug. I have my own business and I provide patient consult care. And so I deal mostly with oncology patients and patients with GI issues. Sometimes they go hand in hand, sometimes they don't. But my goal is to really work on supporting patients' knowledge and capacity. So making sure that the information that they're receiving is science-based, and that they can learn how to manage some of the side effects from treatment or get evidence-based answers to questions around survivorship. So I do a cook and consult, which is where we cook in my kitchen. And it's specifically related to what you need. And I also do one-on-one patient consultation. Thank you.
Absolutely. I love that. What a good idea. It's so necessary. And I mean, it's as cancer patients, when you're all of a sudden hit with that, like, hey, you have cancer, at least I know myself, so I guess I'm only speaking for myself, but in other people that I've spoken with, we're pretty susceptible to all of these myths that are out there. And you don't really know which ones to cling to, which ones are true, what's false, what does society throw out at you, and it can become very, very overwhelming.
And I
Yeah.
agree with that. And I think that part of the reason why I called the business Fearless Food is, and that's my Australian accent. So let me say it in American: Fearless Food. Um, so because people get scared of eating, they get
Yeah.
frightened, and you are, I think, just naturally so susceptible to information, because in cancer you don't have a lot of control. So you look for things that you can control, and one of those is food and nutrition and what you're eating. But you're right, Megan. I mean, everyone's an expert in cancer nutrition, but they're really not. So it's really difficult to work out where to get your information from.
Absolutely.
Yes. That's why I'm so glad that you're here.
I think me and Megan pick up a lot of terms from pages we like, but we tend to call those people cancer muggles, Lisa.
That's great.
I think this is a perfect segue into maybe our first and, quite frankly, maybe the biggest myth is sugar feeds cancer, Lisa. So give us the science on that, please.
I don't know how many times dietitians hear this. There are handouts produced just on this topic because it is typically one of the main things that patients come in and ask. And so if we're talking about does sugar feed cancer, what I really want to think about is dietitians are scientists. It's not really sugar, it's glucose. It's glucose, it's a carbohydrate. So I really think if we're talking about science, we need to use scientific terms. It's kind of like genitalia. We use the right terms in that, and then we know what we're talking about, right? It's a vulva. Yeah, we know what it is. We know where it
Exactly.
is. It's accurate. And so we should do exactly the same thing in science. So
Yes.
when people throw out that line, sugar feeds cancer, first of all, it's just patently wrong. And we really need to look at what the evidence says about glucose. There is no evidence that glucose makes cancer cells grow faster or causes cancer. And I think the thing we really need to think about is metabolism. I mean, how do we fuel our body? We fuel our body with glucose. It is our primary fuel source for our heart, our brain, and our cells. And so you can't selectively feed half your body. Like you can't not feed your cells. You have to do so. You have to feed them with glucose. And if you are not getting enough glucose, what tends to happen is, especially in cancer, your body starts to break down protein. And that's why we see patients with greater losses of muscle mass. And it might be because they're not eating as much, but your metabolic needs increase significantly through cancer. So your body is looking for ways to fuel itself. So if you start cutting back on carbohydrates, you're kind of starving your body, which is not obviously a smart thing to do. But there's some ways around this. So when we think about glucose, are carbohydrates created equal? Well, no, they're not. Like there's a difference between a donut and an apple, for example. One is a simple carbohydrate, one is a complex carbohydrate. So when we look at that, the complex carbohydrate has fiber, it has vitamins, it has minerals. A simple carbohydrate really doesn't have very much. A donut is going to give you a small burst of energy, an apple's going to last a little bit longer. So one way to really think about this purposefully is, how can I combine carbohydrates with a protein or a fat? Because if we do that, we actually slow down the absorption in our GI, and so our blood glucose stays nice and level. So think of things like, I'm going to have a slice of apple with some peanut butter, or I'm going to have some yogurt with my fruit. And that way we're really working with our bodies to provide it the fuel that it needs. But equivocally, I'm just going to say it, sugar doesn't feed cancer.
Where did that come from, do you think?
The myth. I think it's historical, and I think that when people have looked at what does sugar feed off, what does cancer feed off? It feeds off glucose, but every single cell in our body does. And that's why I'm saying you can't starve a tumor. There is no evidence to support doing that. But as I just said, there's a difference between the carbohydrates that we eat. So having processed foods, we're not really fueling our body effectively. What we're going to talk about in a little bit, I think, is what the American Institute of Cancer Research recommends for cancer prevention specifically. But one of those is maintaining a healthy weight. And so eating an apple with peanut butter is really healthy and good for you and giving you lots of vitamins and minerals. A donut, you can do it every now and then, but it's not something that we should be doing every single day or multiple times a day.
Bummer.
I know.
Frankly.
I'm not saying you can't have it. Dietitians are not the food police. We are not that.
Everything in moderation.
Everything
I
in
understand.
moderation. A little of what you fancy, a little of what you fancy. And then you get that flavor, you get that satisfaction, but you're not sitting on the sofa eating, a 24 box of donuts. Or not.
I'm not going to act like I haven't been there before.
I think we've all done it.
Okay, so I'm really glad that we got that one out of the way, because that is the big one. And you said that you were going to send us, before we started recording,
Yes.
you said that you were going to send us some links about this. So for our listeners, look in the show notes, because we are going to link a lot of what Lisa is talking about today, just for everybody's knowledge and edification.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the next one that I have heard a lot is about organic food, switching from non-organic to organic, and that is definitely the better way to go. I don't really know much about this, so I am just going to hand that one right over to
Yeah,
you.
yeah, and it's a great question, and I think a lot of people get into the minutiae of the food that they're eating, which is part of this fearless food thing again, right? It's like, how did I get cancer? I don't know how I got cancer. So therefore, was it the food I was eating? And it 95% of the time, no, it's not. Even higher than that. It's got nothing to do with that. But we're looking for something to control. And so
Right.
when we think about organics, there really is very limited evidence to say that it is healthier for you as far as nutrients, vitamins, minerals, those kinds of things. I think there are some very small studies that talk about isoflavones, which can be an antioxidant, but widely available in a lot of foods. But that might be slightly higher in organics. But the thing is this, organics tend to be much more expensive. People who are paying for organics, therefore, are typically not buying as much fruits and vegetables as they really need to be eating. So, are there reasons for eating organics? Absolutely. There's an environmental reason for eating organics if that is what you care about, or if you're worried about pesticide use. But we know with pesticides, you can wash your fruits and vegetables under running cold water with agitation, and it removes like 99% of any residue that's on the fruit or vegetable that you're eating. So as I said before, there isn't any evidence to say that we should be eating organics, but if you're making that choice, it's typically not related to disease risk. It's related to things associated with the environment, for example.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for
Wow.
that.
You're
I
welcome.
even,
You're welcome.
even just I'm kind of going back to the sugar thing here real quick, but I I love sugar. I love I that's what I crave. Some people crave salty, I crave sweets constantly. And I've heard other people say this, and I very much have this mentality where, let's just say I had a big day at the office and I want to go home and just have a little bit of ice cream or something, and watch some TV and just zone out. There is something there, like that little voice in my head that's always saying, like, you're giving yourself cancer again. You're giving yourself cancer again. And, it's it, as a cancer patient, you want to control as much as you can because you can't really control much of anything throughout
Right.
this whole process. So being able to control your food is so liberating and helpful, for your mentality. But then allowing yourself that extra little bit, that's so tough, feeling like you're doing this to yourself again. I mean, you said it a second ago. What did I do to give myself cancer? What did I eat to do
Right.
this? And I think that that's just it's such a relief to know that, yes, you still of course need to be healthy, but have it. It's not going to be the thing that kills
Exactly.
you.
And I think especially with young women who find themselves in this situation, as both of you and your listeners are in, like we've either dealing with active disease or we're in the survivorship role. And I have counseled and worked with so many patients who I think there is a special kind of fear in breast cancer. And I think it's, as women, we take care of everybody. We want to be able to fulfill that role. And we have these, these appendages on the front of our bodies that God, they let us down, like how did that happen? So when we think about what caused it's amazing to me how we don't really spend as much time thinking about, well, was it my environment, or was it stress, or was it a genetic thing, or was it some quirk that happened in my DNA that caused this? But food seems to come to everybody's mind, and I think, as I said before, it's because it's something we do have control over. And so I have sat in consultations with women who have cried saying that they thought their multivitamin use caused their breast cancer. And that doesn't sound rational, right? And it's not rational. But when we're trying to think about, oh, what did I do? That guilt piece, it just plays so much into this, because we are always seeking an explanation for how did this happen to me? And so we really get in the weeds about food and those kinds of things. And you were talking, Megan, about your craving. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but I think it's part of our attitudes towards foods as well, like how we deal with a stressful day at work, how we deal with you know our desires to eat something, or it might have been a favorite thing as a child. Like you might have been rewarded with ice cream as a child, and you're like, yes, that's what I need when I get home. That makes me really happy. I've heard there's a lemon ice cream at Trader Joe's from one of my patients I follow that is amazing. So, and I'm going to tell you, I would never say to her, don't eat the ice cream, because it's part of who we are and what makes us happy. But when we think about cravings, it's regarded as an altered food behavior. But what we mostly see in the research is that women who've dealt with breast cancer overwhelmingly are represented in this grouping of people who crave sweet things. So is it hormonal? Is it pharmacological? Is it sociocultural? Is it environmental? We get all these pressures coming at us from different areas. Is it advertising? Is it stress that's making you want this? Is it you didn't get enough sleep? Is it a learned response from childhood? There's multiple things playing into this. And what I'm going to say is sometimes it can be when you're really hungry. Sometimes it can be when you're really stressed. And so it's thinking a little bit about how we respond to those things. The key is to not let yourself get really hungry, but to have small meals through the day, like have 5 or 6 small meals through the day. And that way you don't get that yearning, desperate, I've got to have this to eat right now. But the other way to think about this is, okay, so you want something sweet. How about some raspberries with some dark chocolate shaved on it? I mean, that's a win-win, and it tastes really good. It doesn't mean you can't have ice cream. You can have ice cream. But what I would say to you is if you've got your bowl of and your ice cream's in there, put some raspberries and dark chocolate in as well, because you'll probably eat less of the ice cream and you'll get way more health benefits from doing it. But you still get that satisfaction from the sweetness, which I think is what you're saying, Megan.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm going to write that down. When we listen back to this, I'm going to write down, go get raspberries and some dark chocolate.
And raspberries are a steal at the moment. So I was just going to say to that there's actually a review article. It's a systematic review that I was reading today exactly about this topic that I'll put in the list of references for people to have a look at, because it's
Awesome.
super interesting that, there are different altered food behaviors that seem to happen more with women with breast cancer, and the cravings is one. The other one is orthorexia, which is that I'm frightened of eating. If I'm going to eat, I need it to be a very proper diet. Like I need to be very specific and very scientific about what I'm going to eat. And that tends to occur more in breast cancer patients who are highly educated. And they may have other things going on, but there are limited studies saying that that's the same group that we're talking to today, who may be, experiencing that fear.
Yikes.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Right?
just hit a lot.
It is a lot.
But I mean, like what was it called? Orthorexia?
Orthorexia. Yeah.
Orthorexia. Okay. God. You were telling us that you had a client that I think was only eating kale or
Kale
something
and
like
walnut.
that. Oh my God.
Yeah, because she was, and it's exactly what we're talking about. She was so frightened of eating because every source of information that she was reading was talking about glucose and talking about it feeding cancer. And that's why it's so important to use evidence-based websites and sources for your information, because you shouldn't be limiting foods that are healthy and good for you. And so a diet of kale and walnuts is not going to get you very far, and it's certainly not going to help you in when you're getting inactive treatment or even in survivorship. It's going to starve you. So there's nothing wrong with kale and walnuts, but only insofar as they are part of a much broader scheme of eating.
Right. It's also kind of the question of like quality versus quantity when it comes to life, you know? Like
yeah.
we've all busted our ass to still be alive, and now we're here and we're just going to eat kale and walnuts? Absolutely not.
Right.
No,
And I
not
think
I.
right, Sam, it gets back to that love of eating and that love of food and the role food plays in our lives, whether it's cultural. Like we've got Thanksgiving coming up. You know, that's a big cultural event. There are specific foods that people like to see on the table that they've had since, you know, their grandmother made it for them. And why should we, you know, deny ourselves those delights and joys of food? Because food is this incredible thing that brings us together. It binds us together with our culture and our heritage, but also the joy of sharing a meal together is such an important thing for conversation. I'm told that historically around the Thanksgiving table for Americans, it's political conversations which can be fraught. So hopefully hopefully the sweet potato can get you through all of that.
We are embarrassed, Lisa. We are
No,
embarrassed.
it's great. I think it's great. Why not just hash it out and have it at the table?
And then as soon as you get it calmed down, then you've got Christmas and we can just start all over again, start yelling at each other.
Just in case you
Yes,
didn't get
the
everything
American
right.
way.
It's fabulous. I love a good celebration of food.
So,
Oh.
just to clarify then, Lisa, there is no cancer superfood or food that if I eat every single day, I will never have a recurrence.
There is no single magic superfood. However, I will say that there are foods that you should be including more often. Blueberries are amazing. They've got lots of antioxidants in them. They're full of fiber. They're delicious. Um, uh, leafy green vegetables, broccoli is if there is a superfood, there's not, but broccoli is high in fiber. It's got indole. It's a cruciferous vegetable. It's a really great cancer fighter. Using alliums like garlic, ginger, and onion, known cancer fighters, and the basis for so much great food and delicious cooking, but easy to work with and very inexpensive. I mean, an onion is not going to set you back a lot of money. Carrots are great. So you don't have to go out and buy all the fancy pants food. You can just eat food, real food, and it will work in your system to reduce inflammation, to reduce oxidative damage, to help support your body to heal itself and be well.
Yes, wow.
If there were if there were because you know you hear of all the different diets that people are on all the
Right.
time, you know, whether it's you know, gluten free or that's not really a diet, but that or you know, keto
Right.
or fill in the blank, right?
Right.
If there was one, or is there one that you think is better than another?
So I think the research firmly falls on the side of the Mediterranean diet, and that's not new. We've known this for a long time. Lots of studies have looked at this, and it's not just longevity of life; it's quality of life. And so, if you're going to follow one, and I have to say, you know, I'm not a big fan of most of the diets because they restrict a food type. Like it will be, you know, don't eat dairy, or it's don't eat any animal products, or and then supplement, you know, accordingly because you have to replace what you're not eating. But the Mediterranean diet is healthy and it's easy, and I know Sam loves Israeli foods, Middle Eastern food.
Yes.
And so, because I know the shawarma was a hit the other week, and so, and I did
My
say
weekly
that, but
takeout, everybody. My
I was
weekly
like, it's
takeout.
great. Like, that's great. What comes with it? Well, it comes with hummus that's got lovely flavors, it's high in fiber. it's just a high protein food. It's got delicious flavorings with it, and it probably comes with a cucumber salad, which has got really nice lemons. And so thinking about feta cheese, and so thinking a lot about fish, because the Mediterranean diet does have fish within it. It's a less focused on animal protein, but eggs are in it, low fat dairy, all the pulses and legumes, lots of nuts, but lots of fruits and vegetables. And just, it's a very simple way of eating, and working with foods and spices, or using citrus to enhance the flavor of things, lots of fresh herbs. That's the diet that we would recommend. The other thing is, when we think about what we want to prevent happening for people who have already dealt with a cancer diagnosis, is the risk of secondary cancers. And this is the one diet that is cardioprotective. It also reduces your risk for type 2 diabetes. It's got a lot going for it. It's the diet that most dietitians would recommend that you follow.
I
And it's
love that.
downright
And
delicious.
yeah, I was going to say that's why I love that, is because it's so good.
It
You're
is.
not withholding from yourself.
Right, right. And the
Especially the
Mediterranean,
pita bread.
yeah,
People think you like there's no bread. Like, no, the best bread. The best bread. Dip it in the hummus, fill it up, stuff the pita. It's like a little sandwich. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And the salad is not really like salad. You're like, oh, is this a snack? You're like, whoa.
right. And I think it's so easy to prepare, but I just want to say the Mediterranean diet is not just adding feta cheese to your salad and calling it good. It's not, that is not the Mediterranean diet. It's a little bit more than that. It involves, getting some canned chickpeas or some beans, or some learning how to cook with lentils. But there are lots of delicious ways to do that. And I think once people start feeling comfortable with, using olive oil, which is a healthy fat, you can use avocados, eggs, there are many overlaps with what we currently would say is the Western diet, but most of the fats are healthy fats in the Mediterranean diet. And because of the reduction in animal protein, we lose a lot of those saturated fats. So it's healthy in so many ways.
So, Lisa, you've been mentioning an, animal products. So meats, cheeses, yogurt, milk. I know that milk, there's a lot surrounding milk. So this is kind of a compound question. I might just let you run with it, but um, what what science is there, and what do you have to add to the science for us surrounding animal products? So,
Right.
meat, cheese, milk, all of that, especially if you have estrogen and progesterone positive breast cancer.
Right. So that is a compound question, and it's going to take a few little segments to break it down. So if I forget something, will you just tell me?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I just am going to start by saying the line of one of my colleagues and friends, who's another dietitian, and she says, I eat all the foods. And I'm just going to say that I eat all the foods. I do, because I haven't really found any evidence that tells me I need to avoid any one thing. But I eat them in moderation. So let's start with what the research says about red meat, because I think it's something that comes up. The American Institute for Cancer Research is a seminal website that I'm going to send you guys as a link, because you can just type in your question, it's going to answer it for you. So they are partnered with the World Cancer Research Fund, and they look at all the research, and they put it together, and they come up with these updates. They're called CUP updates, Continuous Update Project. And they have one for breast cancer, which I'll send you, but they also have general recommendations for people to avoid cancer or to reduce your risk. And so I think the red meat question is really important. So the recommendation is less than 18 ounces a week of red meat. Now, so that's over a pound, but it's just a pound and 2 ounces. So if you look at what the research says, that's what the research says. And choosing lean red meat within that, like not choosing high fat cuts of meat, especially. One of the things I think a lot of people ask about is bacon. And so let's talk a little bit about bacon, because I read The Guardian each day in the UK, and they're always having a conniption about how bacon. Another study has come out and said that bacon is bad for you. And it's like, what else are we going to eat for breakfast? It's a disaster. But the thing with the bacon is there's several things. The first is it's a smoked meat. And we think that during the smoking process, something changes in the DNA, and that could be concerning for our DNA or the way that we process foods. The other thing is it's a very, very high fat product. And we tend to recommend not having a high fat intake, like having a lower fat, especially because it's a saturated fat. It's not a great choice. Does it mean that you can't eat bacon? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just doesn't mean that you have 6 slices, twice a day to eat. Everything in moderation, right?
Right.
Okay. So the other thing, let's talk about this, is the smoked meats thing again. So does this
Mhm.
mean you can't have a hot dog at the baseball? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But what it's saying is we know that this food product is potentially concerning. It's mostly related to colorectal cancer, but other cancers as well. And so, what we know is that saying we just don't want you to do it regularly doesn't mean you can't eat it. Like, it doesn't mean you can't have one when you're going out. It doesn't mean that at all. So that's what the research says about red meat. Let's talk a little bit about dairy. There's actually
Yes.
quite a lot of research about low fat dairy being healthy and good for you. It's preventative against type 2 diabetes. It's a great source of protein. But for women who have had breast cancer or are going through breast cancer, often bone health can be a concern. Dairy is a great source of calcium, and it's a quick and easy thing to eat. So when we look at what does the research say about milk, I think a lot of people, there's a lot of milks on MELK in the marketplace now. I mean, there's almond, there's soy, there's oat, there's cashew, there's coconut. I mean, there's lots of different choices. So when we look at that, what the American Institute of Cancer Research says is that there is no evidence linking dairy intake to an increase in the risk of developing cancer or having a recurrence of cancer. But what they do say is there are high fat dairy products which fall into that high fat category again. So things like, if you're going to have a big fat wedge of brie, it doesn't mean you can't have it, but you're not going to be having it every single day, because that is the food that contributes to us eating too many calories, right? And gaining weight. And we know that obesity is linked to a concern when it comes to cancer. So, as far as milk goes, milk is a great source of calcium. It's a great source of protein, but there are other choices, and some people are lactose intolerant. If you're lactose intolerant, you have to have another choice, right? For that. But also, where are you getting your calcium from? Plenty of places to find calcium that are not in dairy. So you can have greens like broccoli, kale, bok choy, collard greens, dried beans and peas, edamame, soybeans, almonds, sesame seeds. Some cereals are fortified with calcium. So it's not a hard thing to get. You just have to be more purposeful with it. Megan, did I answer
So
all that question, or did I miss some out?
I think you got all of it. The thing that I'm kind of hanging on to right now, where this next question is coming from, is bone health.
Yeah.
So I ended up having a full hysterectomy. Everything's gone. Um, cervix included, just nothing left. um, and about a year out, I just had another bone scan. I had one before the hysterectomy and then one just recently. And it showed a deterioration already. I just got these results. I don't think I've even talked to you about them, Sam. But it showed a deterioration in a lot of my joints. So, like, I feel it in my fingers, in my toes. Um, I don't know what they're called, but like these bones, but in my feet.
Hmm.
those are starting to
Yep.
deteriorate, and I can feel that every single day. Like, God help me when I wear my heels for work. Like, it hurts so bad, and my hips and a few other joints. So I can tell that it's starting to happen.
Right.
It's starting to occur. And I, before you and I started talking, I was also really worried about, milk and getting enough calcium, especially for that bone health. Now, I happen to just like almond milk better than regular milk. So that's what I'm up to. But I remember thinking, and I heard somewhere, God knows where, that in milk, there's obviously a ton of estrogen because a cow is, if you can milk it, it's got estrogen
Right.
going on,
Right.
right? I would imagine. So I was just thinking that, with milk, I would just be dousing myself in estrogen, which is why I'm taking all of the pills every day, the aromatase inhibitors. That's why I had the hysterectomy. So
Right.
why would I be filling myself up full of estrogen? What can you say to that?
So, what I would say is the way our metabolism works, I think it really gets down into science is how do we break down the foods that come into our system? Like we put food in our mouth, it starts getting broken down in our mouth, it goes to our stomach, hydrochloric acid, breaking everything up, making a mush called chyme, moving through our body. But what our body does is it breaks food down. It breaks down proteins, it breaks down substances, it breaks down cell walls so that it can break it down to component parts to build its own tissue and cells. So that estrogen is going to get broken down, is what I'm going to say to you. And it's the same, I think the other thing that we talked about was soy, and that also, has this I'm going to put in estrogen in inverted commas because it's not the estrogen that we produce in our bodies. It's not the same estrogen that we have. So we just need to think about it that way because it's not the way that metabolism works. Does that make
I think
sense?
that's a that no, that makes perfect
Yeah,
sense. Thank you.
yeah.
And I think that that's a really good segue into the soy question because
Well, hang on
that
1
was
minute, because I want to get back to
yeah.
your wee little bones and your
Oh, yes.
osteopenia, because I'm worried about those little phalanges in your feet now. And so, because you prefer almond milk, it's great. It's fortified. It's got calcium in it. But it's not just the calcium. When you are on aromatase inhibitors, it can really cause this osteopenia that you're talking about. Also, a lot of patients receive steroids, and steroids also can cause bone issues. So, when we're thinking about how we take care of our health, and Megan, this is for you and anyone else who's concerned about their bones, it's not just the calcium, but it's also vitamin D. So, vitamin D is in fatty fish, it's in some fortified foods, but it's a good idea to get your vitamin D checked when you have your annual because it can go up and down, and we just want to make sure that you've got enough of it to be there to support your bones. The other thing is magnesium is also super important. So it's the three for bones. So it's the calcium, the vitamin D, the magnesium, and protein's also important too. But magnesium is in green veggies, nuts and legumes. So you're probably hearing a common theme. Like the foods that we're talking about for bones were the same foods that we were talking about, like when we talk about does sugar feed the cancer? Eat leafy greens, eat healthy foods, eat plant-based proteins, eat the Mediterranean diet. It's all the same kinds of stuff, but it's going to help with those wee little bones in your feet.
Well, thank you. They
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. I wrote that down while you were talking. So, calcium, vitamin D, and
Mag-
magnesium.
yeah, yeah. And some weight bearing
Got it.
exercise. And that doesn't mean toting like a barbell everywhere you go walking around the office. Walking is a weight bearing exercise. But that helps to really get that bone strength in, which is really important. So sorry to interrupt you. Now we can talk about soy.
I'm so glad that you did interrupt me. Thank you. So yeah, let's talk about soy. I mean, you called it a phytoestrogen.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah, like
plant
what
based.
does that mean? And
Yeah,
there's been
it's a
so many. I've heard definitely eat tons of soy. I remember when my mom had breast cancer in the early 2000s. I remember she would just buy soybeans and just eat them kind of by the
mhm.
handful. And then I've also heard people say, "Oh my god, avoid it at all
Right,
costs. No
right.
soy."
And I think this is just an example of how science evolves and changes. And over time, we learn new things. And we've got longevity in studies. And we look at Asian populations where soy intake is much more significant and the lower risk of disease. And what does that look like for us, a society, a Western society that typically doesn't have soy in large volumes or even at all? In fact, some people are like, I don't even know what that is. Like, why would I eat that? But what we know,
Edamame who?
edamame, that's right. That's right. And what do you want me to do with that? And it's sort of, we think about this phytoestrogen, this plant-based estrogen, it's called an isoflavone. And so the thing we need to know is it doesn't convert to estrogen in our bodies. It's not the same as the estrogen that, we're trying to get rid of to prevent cancer. It's not the same. In fact, what we know is the studies show that an increased soy intake can actually be protective, which is something that we all want to do. And one of the recommendations from the American Institute for Cancer Research is to actually have soy intake because we know that it's protective. It's the same as like eat fiber. Those two recommendations specifically for breast cancer patients are really important. And so, I mean, the thing is, we don't all love tofu. I have to say, I'm not a great fan, but it doesn't mean I don't eat it. I do. I just don't eat it a lot. But there are multiple different choices. I mean, Sam mentioned edamame. I mean, it became sort of like the hip bar snack a few years back. It was like you'd
Mhm.
pay $10 for the little tiny bowl of edamame in their pod, and you'd suck them out of the pod and go, "Oh, this is really great." Well, you can buy a bag of edamame for a couple of bucks at the supermarket, toss them in a bowl with some olive oil, sea salt, and chili flakes, and throw them in the oven, high heat for about 10 minutes, and you've got that bar snack. And you've got a half cup of soy, which is one of the recommendations for people who are dealing with breast cancer. So, you've got whole soy, tofu, tempeh, edamame, um, soy milk. And what we tend to focus on is those whole soy foods, not the granola bars that have more soy isoflavones added to them. We're not so sure about those products, but those whole soy foods, they're really healthy for you and they're very protective.
So, would you recommend to people kind of like what we said before where just add it in, throw it in where you can, or do you think that it's something that somebody like myself should focus on really implementing in their diet on like a daily basis?
I think it's one of those recommendations that has some really strong science behind it. And you look up on AICR and you can look at the studies and what their recommendations are. And because this is protective and because it's a great source of protein, it's almost zero, it's zero fat. It will take on any flavor that you want to add to it. It's just a way of trying to find out how you're going to put it in, Megan. So it might be, I'm going to have some soy milk in the morning on my breakfast cereal or in my oatmeal, and then I'm going to make some of those fun little edamame pods, and I'm going to take those to work, and I might have a cup of that. There's your 2 servings, your 3 servings rather, because
Love it.
you've sorry, let me rephrase, 2 servings, because it's half a cup of edamame and 1 cup of soy milk. That's what the serving size looks like, or a quarter of a cup of tofu. So how you do that is really up to you. I'm just going to put this out there. I haven't included the recipe yet, but I can. There is a delicious tofu chocolate mousse recipe. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but it is a delicious tofu chocolate mousse, and it goes all in the food processor, and it is so good.
I would like that recipe.
Okay,
But
I'll write it down. I'll put it on the link.
thank you.
It's
I
super.
think that's a perfect segue into, can you kind of give our listeners maybe your top 3 easy recipes? I know that we'll probably link some below, but just your off the cuff go to, they can Google it, easy, blah, blah, blah meal.
Okay, so For people who follow Alison Roman on Instagram, this will not be a surprise, but I think my number one choice would be hashtag the stew. It is a spiced chickpea and turmeric stew. So it's got turmeric in it, which we know is a great cancer fighting spice. It just tastes delicious and it comes together so quickly. I actually did a cook and consult with a patient on Friday and we cooked this together, or she actually cooked it. And she texted me to say, this is probably one of the best meals I've had in the last 2 years, and I made it. And it was like, yeah, and
Yay!
it's
Love
really
that.
really easy. So I think that would be my first choice. I think because we've been talking about soy, I think the tofu chocolate mousse, because we all like to have something sweet, but we want to have something that we know is good for us or is going to meet that sweet craving because we've been talking about this stuff. Great protein. You can have just a little amount of it and feel really satiated by the experience. So I think that would be my second one. I'm
And
just
not guilty too. I think that's an important thing that we skip over is it's not just, oh, I'm eating this sweet food or I'm indulging in this craving. You feel guilty for doing it because you know that there's probably a lot of added sugars depending on what you're eating. Um, so I just wanted to put that in there because
No, I think
that's
that's
a big thing
great.
for
I
me.
think, we haven't really talked that much about added sugars, and we can do that at another time. But I think just really focusing on real foods is important because then you know what's in the food. When
Mhm.
we buy processed foods, when the ingredient list doesn't start with something you can recognize, it's probably not something you should buy. So, anyway, that's just a segue. I'm just thinking of a third recipe.
If it looks like this, I avoid it. If I have to, if it looks like a really long list and I don't know half or over 5 of the ingredients, like I'm just not doing it. And that's not to say I don't eat any junk food. I have my potato chips and my fast food trips like anybody else. I try to keep a 75-25. 25, I lean into the craving, and if I really want some fast food french fries, I'll get the french fries, but just the french fries, not the whole meal.
Right, right.
Is there times when I get the whole meal? Absolutely. But also, like, I feel really good when I know what I'm putting into my body. And those whole foods make me feel way more satiated than, you know, a craving or something like that.
And that's because of the fiber content, Sam. The fiber content makes you feel full. Plus, we're hyper. I think we're hyper focused on the flavor profiles we get from these very processed foods, and it's not. You can't replicate that. Like you can't.
It's not
You can't
real.
go to your and say, okay, I'm going to make something that tastes just like Doritos because you're not going to be able to do that. But
Right.
you really I think getting an appreciation of how to use spices, how to use citrus, how to use herbs, those kinds of things are really valuable for our sense of well-being. And I really dislike feeling guilty about foods. I think we make choices. And so if you make a choice to eat something because you are desperate to eat it, have 3 Oreos, don't have the whole pack. It's sort of thinking about those things because you will feel virtuous after that. And the other thing, if you wanted to eat those, go for a walk. At least you're balancing it, right? It's a balance. Our body is a machine. And so we really need to think about the quality of what we put in and the quality of what we get out, like the energy we feel, those kinds of things. So that gave me time to think about my third choice would
Yes.
be an amazing recipe I have for hummus. It is so easy.
Send that to me.
It's got like 4 or 5 ingredients. It's there's an English chef named Yotta Motalengi who also writes for the New York Times now. But in the past, he's had a partnership with a wonderful chef named Sami Tamimi, and he has this amazing hummus recipe. Like all your friends will be begging you to make it. And it's
Maybe
in
I'll
the food
make it for
processor.
Thanksgiving next week. I know that would be not traditional Thanksgiving, but I'm not
Oh
traditional,
no, I
so
think you should
it's
do it.
perfect.
And the thing is, hummus is pricey at the store. Like you buy that chintzy
Mhm.
little container and it's got ingredients in it that may not belong in hummus, but it's gone in a flash. Whereas this
Mhm.
recipe, you make enough to feed the neighborhood and everyone's happy.
Ooh,
I
I'm
think that would be
excited.
a first for me to make something and have people just clamor for it.
This
I
is going to happen. I can tell you, I am confident, Megan, that this is in your very near future.
We can make it on
I,
video together, Megan.
we should. We absolutely should. I have always joked that I am a utilitarian cook, as in, if an army came into my family room and said, "We just fought a battle, we need calories, we need something to fall asleep on," I can feed you and you will be fine. Will you walk away from my house saying, "Oh my God, that was like what my grandma used to make"? Absolutely not. You'll be like, "That wasn't awesome, but it got me through." That's how my cooking has always been. Big fan of a crock pot. Just toss everything in there and call it a day.
and that crock pot is fantastic because it's slow cooking. It breaks down proteins. So for patients who've got GI issues, it's ideal. But it's also great for people who are working because you can stick stuff in it, go to work, come home, and there's dinner. You know, I've got a fabulous beef and barley soup recipe that is completely cooked in the crock pot, and it's just it fills the house with this lovely aroma. So you walk in and you feel like you've had someone in to prep your meal, and you haven't. You just were organized enough to get it together in the morning or the night
Yeah, see,
before.
that's the kicker too.
Yeah, that's the
I
kicker.
gotta work on that.
Cooking shouldn't take a
Well,
long time.
so you mentioned fiber,
Yeah,
and it made me think about. So I am gluten free. I'm not celiac. I just puff up like a puffer fish,
yeah.
and I turn bright red if I have gluten. So I don't really have it in my diet. And what I have found is that it's really difficult to get fiber on a gluten free diet. And maybe I haven't done enough looking into this. Maybe I'm just very used to the types of foods that I eat already. But can you talk to us about kind of the role of fiber and then maybe give us some ideas of what else that is not
Gluten.
gluttony
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
that we could do?
Absolutely. So fiber has so many different roles, but primarily it's to help you poop. And you know, if you are not getting enough fiber, it's going to be real unpleasant down there. And so it's sort of, you know, a lot of patients are taking pain medications or nausea medications, all of which can make you constipated. And so there are two different types of fiber. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber. Most foods have a combination of both. But fiber, they have different roles in the GI as well, but they both can help to make you feel full. So fiber is really important for those who are trying to maintain a healthy weight because it makes your stomach feel full. If you eat your fruits and vegetables on your plate first, you're likely to eat less of what else is on your plate, and they are where the powerhouse is, right? And so what fiber does is, besides providing you know, bulk for stool volume, what it actually does is it removes unhealthy fats from your body. It engages with those and you excrete them out. The other thing fiber does is it helps feed your microbiome. And so when we think about what the microbiome is, there's a ton of research out there. And if you haven't heard that term before, it's the environment where um, the microorganisms live. We're talking specifically about within our body, it's within our GI, and they play a major role in immune function, in the way that we move through the day, through cell repair. We think they produce their own DNA, and they do all these amazing things. I'm doing some work at the moment with a physician on, can we change the microbiome through the foods we eat? Well, yes, we can. So, fiber in particular tends to favor healthy bacteria in our microbiome that produces healthy substances. So, fiber has this multi overlay of reasons why it's important in our diet, but most Americans don't get nearly enough. For women, we're looking 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. That's hard to get. Most people are around 10 to 12 grams of fiber a day. So the thing is, if you're going to increase
So
your
like
fiber,
30%.
right? So if you're going to increase your fiber, increase your fluids as well, because as I said, it could get real nasty down there. So let's just make sure that you're increasing your fluids at the same time. But fiber is in all those fruits and vegetables, Megan. So all the fruits and vegetables that you eat, all the whole grains that you eat, the only thing you're avoiding is gluten. So gluten is in wheat. So most wheat products we eat don't have a lot of fiber anyway. So, I mean, if you think about pasta, there's very little fiber in pasta unless it's fortified. But really, fiber is in a lot of the really healthy foods that you shop on the perimeter of the supermarket, or in those dried beans and legumes and pulses. They've got a lot of fiber as well.
Okay. Yeah, I don't usually go for the beans, and not because I don't like them. It just doesn't really register that that's a thing to do. I need to work on that.
Well, you know, my kids and their friends laugh at me all the time because I love beans. They're one of my favorite things, and I cook them all the time. And there's no point, in my opinion, in doing less than 10 pounds at a time. So because it's such an effort, you may as well fill the freezer. That's all I know.
I love
I I love how you mentioned shopping the perimeter. That's also what I do. I will get my, like I said, my bags of chips that I like. I really like the Lay's like baked Cheetos, and then
Uh-huh.
some of like kettle cooked chips. But then for the most part, after that, I shop the perimeter. I'll get my little Dr. Peppers too, but then I'll shop the perimeter, and that's helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
And it forces me at my house. I'm like, okay, in my fridge, I have all of these fresh fruits and vegetables. So, and what's also helped me is getting like frozen corn or something like that. I'm not a canned corn type of
Yep.
person,
Yep.
but easily just heating up like, and what I like is they're not too big of a serving size either. It's perfect for, 2 to 3 people. So just helped me. That's all I'm going to say.
And I know, Megan, where you're going to go, but I'm just going to respond to Sam for a minute. Sam, I'm glad you brought up frozen fruits and veg, because it's a really great way to reduce food waste. They're picked at their peak. They're usually less expensive, and you tend to, they're not mouldering in the bottom of the fridge before you know what the heck's going on. It's a busy week and you've got 3 slimy zucchinis. I mean, it's not going to happen with frozen fruits and veg. So I love that. I think it's great. Megan,
It's
I
the
know where you were
when you
going,
get the slime.
right?
Slime
Oh,
is,
yeah. And don't think dietitians don't have slimy fruits and vegetables. It happens. In fact, if you look on my Instagram, Fearless Food Eats, you will see that I do these no recipe recipes of things that are looking quite tragic in my fridge. And I'm not too proud to take photos of fruits and vegetables that are looking very, very sad. And can I give them a new life? And most of the time we can. But Megan, you were going to ask.
Oh, you know me already. What was I going to ask? I was going to ask about the drinks.
I know you're
Alcohol
going to
and
ask about
Diet
aspirin.
Coke.
You're
Yes.
gonna,
So I
I knew it.
unfortunately I live off of Diet Coke or Diet Dr. Pepper or whatever at the office. I've made a rule I do not buy it for the house because then we'd be in real trouble. But when I'm at the office, they kind of keep us stocked with, Pepsi, Coke products,
Right.
whatever. And alcohol in general. Now, for me personally, I'm not drinking much alcohol recently, but it is not because of any health kick that I'm on or anything. It is simply because I have horrible hot flashes and they will last for about 24 hours
Yeah.
if I drink alcohol right now. So sometimes it's just not even worth it. I might do a glass of wine, but I long for the days that I could just pound some like Jim Beam and Diet Coke and just mix them all together, and just go one after the other. So this is not me getting on my high horse. I just
No,
really hate being hot all the time now and sweating in
I get.
places that shouldn't sweat.
And women metabolize alcohol differently, so it affects us differently. And when you've had an overhaul of your whole metabolic system through having cancer and chemotherapy, things change. The way that our body responds to alcohol changes, and if you've gone through menopause, it affects you differently. So, but let's get back to Sam's lovely Diet Coke as well, or Pepsi. So I actually researched this recently for a patient because she was really worried about this as well. What the research says is that you have to be drinking like between 13 to 15 cans of the diet drink per day for it to be a concern. The other thing is what we're mostly seeing is that it's patients who have diabetes are at a higher risk of becoming ill from this. And it's not just because they have aspartame in their drinks, they might also be having sorbitol in other food sources. They might be using artificial sweeteners in their tea. They might be having foods that naturally, or not naturally, rather, have been fortified with these products. So they're getting a much higher concentration, if you like, of these sweeteners. And so that's where the science is really focusing on that. So I think, Megan, if you're having, your 3 to 4 drinks per day at the office, I'm not really overly worried about that.
That makes me feel so much better.
Okay.
When you said 13 to
Alcohol.
15, I was like, I'm looking at like 2 or 3 a day.
Yeah.
So I'm in the clear.
And right. And I think the other thing that we should think about is when research gets reviewed or released, the media just hones onto one sentence from a report. And it's not for anyone's benefit that they do that, because you miss the whole premise of the study or what the limitations were. And so you're just getting some reporters' take on a study without really reading it and absorbing what the details say. So, but let's talk a little bit about alcohol. And I know this is a really sensitive topic for a lot of women who have breast cancer, because I think a lot of people enjoy alcohol. They enjoy the feel of it. Megan, not now, because, as I said, what we put our bodies through changes the way that we metabolize, but also the way things taste. Sometimes alcohol just doesn't taste good, or we don't like the way that it makes us feel. And that can change over time. So I think, what the research says, it used to be, they would say 1 standard drink per day for women and 2 for men was the upper limit of what you should be drinking. And I don't know about you, but a standard drink is not the glass I have in my house, because I've measured it out and I know it's not. So I think the size of the beverage is important to sort of think about that. I think, from my experience with women with breast cancer, alcohol is something that you probably should talk to your physician about, because we come up against that quality of life piece. And I have one gorgeous young patient I'm thinking of at the moment who is very evidence-based and wants to follow what all the data says. And now we're saying, alcohol is linked to so many cancers. It's not specific to breast cancer. We've got esophageal, we've got gastric, we've got multiple other cancers that alcohol is implicated. And basically it's because it's a poison for our body. So, but as I said at the beginning, dietitians are not the food police. My job is just to tell you what the science says, and we all get to make our own decisions about what we want to do. And so thinking about quality of life is super important. We feel guilty about so much, as Sam was talking about. I don't think that this is something that we should feel guilt about. But if you're concerned about it, I think you should talk with your oncologist and just get their read on it, because they know you as the whole package. And the research, the research is just research. It's just saying this is what we found out. But for each individual person, it has to be a decision that they feel comfortable with.
Do you think that there's any data on one type of alcohol being better than another? Like, for example, a glass of red wine. I mean, going back to your, all of these studies that are basically just clickbait. I saw one the other day that like 1 glass of red wine a day will let you live to 100,
Keep the
or
doctor
whatever.
away.
Keep the doctor away, or whatever. I mean, is my whiskey better or worse than red wine?
So we used to think that the resveratrol in red wine was cardioprotective, and we're not so sure about that anymore. But what I will say is we do encourage the Mediterranean diet, and alcohol is a part of the Mediterranean diet. At the same
Oh, I
time,
love
though,
that, Lisa.
don't have
Talk
as
dirty to
red
me.
meat. They don't have as much red meat. They do eat more fruits and vegetables and whole grains. So, as I said before, adding feta cheese to your salad does not mean you are eating the Mediterranean diet. So I'm just that's I don't think the research now is that supportive of red wine or any specific kind of alcohol. Um, but, I think when we look globally, everyone in the world eats differently, right? What we eat here in the United States is different to what people eat in Japan or what they eat in Paris. Um, if you told the Parisians that they needed to stop drinking wine to prevent cancer, would they do that? Yeah.
Absolutely not. No.
So I think it's quality of life. I think it's quality of life. And that's why if this is something you're worried about, like Sam talked about guilt, if it's something that you're doing and you just are like, oh God, this is, I'm just, I feel so bad doing this, that completely defeats the point. So talk with your oncology team to sort of get their take on it, I think is my best advice for that.
Beautiful.
Great
Thank you.
advice, Lisa. It's definitely obvious you have cancer close to your family, and not that I'm saying that in a positive way, but just so you
I
can
do,
recommend that to our listeners,
it,
because I
it's important, Sam, right?
mhm.
You've got to live your life. I mean, Megan said at the beginning, I've just been basically through hell and back. I've done all these things to my body. I've had all these things removed from my body. And now you're going to tell me I can't do all these things I actually like doing? Like ice cream's kind of important, right? Yeah, it is. And people will feel the same way about a glass of wine when they get home. And I think, if they've had a stressful day at work, sure, are there other ways you can manage your stress? But if you're coming home to a partner who has poured a glass of red wine for themselves and it's part of your unwind at the end of the day, as I said, I'm not the food police. I can only tell you what the research says. And I think quality of life is just critically important. It is crucially important. So, we all have to just do what is right for us.
Love that too, Lisa.
I was going to ask you if, because I mean we're kind of winding up on time, so I
Yeah.
was going to ask you if you could give a short snippet of what your takeaway is from this. But I feel like you just did it perfectly. Um, live
I
your life.
really
Eat the
eat the
go.
food.
Yeah, go for
Eat
it.
the foods. I think that we get so caught up, as I said before, when we think about what caused our cancer, because there's so much that's out of our control. Like we can't control where the power lines are put through our suburb, or we can't control um, the sun. The impact of sun on our skin. Now, we can put some sunscreen on, but we're probably still going to get some sun exposure. There are so many things we can't control, which is why we come back to food. And what I think my overarching message would be, enjoy the foods, enjoy what makes you happy. If making an eye fillet of steak once a month for you to enjoy with your family is what is something that drives you and is exciting and tastes fantastic, do it. But it's special because you do it less frequently. More frequently, make the great big salad. Throw in the pomegranate oreals. Find a way to put soy into your diet. But at the same time, if you're going to have some Cheetos, Sam, enjoy them because you're making that choice. It's not all or nothing. It's a little of what you fancy. And I think that that's really important when we think about the foods that we choose. I'm not a big fan for processed foods. I never have been. And I love the flavors that I can produce in my kitchen. And so I would encourage your listeners to sort of think about, some simple, easy recipes that you can use on a recurring basis that are going to taste fantastic, that aren't going to take you all day, aren't going to cost you the earth. Not all good food comes from Whole Foods. It often comes from the local fruit and vegetable market where you wash it at home and you enjoy it because it's delicious. And, cheese. Have a piece of cheese. Cheese is amazing. Sure, there are higher fat cheeses than, and lower fat cheeses. There are high flavor cheeses. There are cheeses that taste like cardboard. Choose the one that makes you happy and have a small serving of it. And then just balance it with other things through the day. It's not all or nothing. And that's, I think, part of the reason why I'm not a big diet fan, because if you're telling me that I need to take this whole food group out of the foods that I eat, I'm probably not going to do very well with that diet, because it doesn't fit with what makes me happy. So eat the foods that make you happy. Think about the foods that just bring a joy to you, whether it's something that your grandmother made, and include it on your table, because you will get so much from that, and it will also probably reduce some stress and increase some happiness in your body.
I'll tell you what, a good fat chunk of Irish cheddar with a
There
little
you go.
bit with a little bit of red wine, done.
Right,
Done.
right. Well,
That's
so
where the
let's
joy lives.
right. So let's think about that, Megan. So a lot of calcium, a lot of protein. I could almost make that healthy if I tried long enough.
Please do.
But
Please do.
the protein and the joy is where the health is, right? The
Yeah.
little bit of saturated fat in it, you're having a slice of it with a glass of wine. It's about what makes you happy. That is something I could just see the look on your face when you describe that. It's like, oh my God, this speaks to me. I can relate to that completely. I totally can. Piece of toast with Vegemite makes me so happy. See,
Stop it,
look at your
Lisa. You eat the
faces.
Vegemite? Of course
Oh
you
my
do.
God.
But
Yes, we've got a kilo bucket of it here.
Sam, have you ever tried it?
No, I
No.
have not.
God's gift to the planet.
I will call it an acquired taste.
Yeah, I think
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard, and I think that's why I'm afraid. Any acquired taste things, I am on the latter side of the acquired taste.
What about
So
olives? You like olives?
nope, I think they
Yeah.
taste like rubber.
Yeah. It's going to take some time, Sam. It's going to take some time.
We're a
I
work
know
in
of it. I
progress,
love it.
Lisa, but
We all are. We're all a work in progress.
I so hope we can have you on reoccurring episodes on the show. I know I have loved having you on here. I can see by Megan's facial expressions. She's loved having you on here, and we just had a grand old time. So I would love to do this if you are available
Of
sometime in the
course.
future.
And I would love it if some of your listeners would send in some questions, because if
Oh,
they've got
yes.
a question, they're not the only people with that question. There are other people wondering how to do things or what the science says, and I'm happy to look things up, and give you an evidence-based answer. And so I think let's just, leave this with saying, make sure you're careful where you get your information from. Make sure that you source it effectively. I know I shared this with you guys when I typed in a couple of questions. I think one was, does sugar feed the tumor? This lovely website came up, and I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, look at this. It was a very official title. I'm not going to say it here because I don't want to be accused of slander. But I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I started reading the article. And if I had not known better, I would have walked away from that thinking I can never eat anything that's a carbohydrate again. And then I looked at who we are, and I looked through the list of the people who had written the information, and I realized it was deliberately set out to look really official and trustworthy, and none of the people who were making these claims were actually qualified to do so. So
Propaganda.
right, it is propaganda, and there's so much of it. And the person who's serving you at the supermarket is not a nutrition expert, and neither is your neighbor's sister's aunt. So just make sure that you get your information from places that are reliable. And I know you lovely ladies are going to be doing that.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media,
Yeah, absolutely.
on your website?
Yeah, my website is fearlessfood.health. It's a Squarespace website. You can go on there. You can look at my published articles. You can look at things that I've been involved in. You can also learn a bit more about me and what my consultation style is like. And my Instagram is Fearless Food Eats. And so lots of great photos of food that's comforting, food that's just delicious. The remnants of the bottom of my vegetable crisper being thrown into some form or another to resemble a meal. And I would just say I'm very practical and I'm very real about food. So yeah, please come and hit me up online, like on my website, and set up a consult with me or follow me on Instagram, and I'll keep posting things that are delicious and healthy.
We're going to link all of that. So for our listeners,
Yeah.
you will absolutely have access to just click and go to Lisa's
Great.
sites.
That sounds great. And I look forward to talking with you lovelies at some time in the future.
I can't wait for it.
Happy
So
Thanksgiving.
thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving
Yes.
to you.